The rudder is gone 2 miles from the shore, and unfortunately they're drifting towards the rocks. In this episode of the Sailor's Debrief, this vessel rolls and tragically somebody's killed when they get caught up in the surf. We're going to explain to you why it's important in some instances to panic early and how to communicate an emergency. If you don't have an emergency action plan on your vessel, you might want to rethink that.
Get ready for a massive roll-up. Think about a candy bar. Right there. Let's go.
This is Schaefer from the Ministry of Sailing, and today I'm coming to you from St. Croix, where we just finished racing in the Three Sheets Regatta. Now, doing the research of this episode, I heard the words like lawyers, lawsuits, and lies. Oh boy, this one's going to be a good one, so clip in. I don't care if you race a 65-foot ocean sled or a 22-foot Catalina. This episode is going to be for you. I guarantee you, you're going to learn something. A few years ago on the West Coast, early in the season, race boats were traveling south along the coast, and it was at night when this tragic incident occurred. This 30-foot racing boat weighed 4,000 pounds. For the offshore special regulations, it actually met or even exceeded what the requirements were for the safety equipment on this vessel, and there were 6 people on board. Of the 6 people on board, a few of them had already taken the certificate for offshore racing at Safety at Sea. At 21:30, Snowman lost its rudder with the wind somewhere between 20 to 25 miles per hour. The seas were 6 to 8 feet, sometimes the swells would reach up to 10 feet. At this point, I want to point out the Sailor's Debrief is not to blame or shame anybody. As a matter of fact, we take the lessons learned and we share them with the sailing community. Halfway through the race, this boat lost its rudder. The skipper hailed the Coast Guard on Channel 16 to make them aware of the situation. We're going to call the boat the Snowman. And they started communicating what their situation was with the Coast Guard. In the heavy seas and the wind, the skipper discussed with his crew what their options were. Of their options, they decided to try to sail out of the situation and get a tow later in the day. For decades, sailboats have been designed with a V-hull for directional stability to keep going straight ahead. Often you're going to see jury-rigged rudders work in these situations. But with some of the newer race boats that are lighter, with high-aspect rudders, jury-rigged rudders will not work. These types of boats will only be able to control steering and the loss of a rudder with a specifically designed emergency rudder for that vessel. One of the issues that World Sailing has is in their offshore special requirements. The requirement is that a boat has to demonstrate its ability to be controlled without a rudder. But some boats, that's going to be an impossibility. And that's probably where World Sailing has to consider a change. The offshore special regulations for some boats with flatter bottoms without the V-hulls, with the high aspect rudders and the high aspect keels, most likely they're going to have to need a specially designed rudder. I would love to see that change. When they hailed the Coast Guard, 2 other boats responded. One was a few miles away. Boat A was 12 miles downwind, and Boat B was about a mile to a mile and a half, also downwind. When they both spoke to the Snowman said no, they did not need assistance. He was limiting his choices at that point of rescue options. After trying everything, ropes with buckets, drogues, jury-rigged rudders, they were unable to gain control of the vessel. So they called the Coast Guard again, trying to request a tow. The Coast Guard responded that the tow vessel would not be able to get there for 20 hours. The skipper, most unfortunately in that early quick decision, placed his confidence and his hope into a rescue resource that was never going to be able to help them in time. Now 1 hour had passed since the loss of the rudder. They've tried absolutely everything and it didn't work. And it was at this point on VHF that the skipper made his first call and requesting assistance from the U.S. Coast Guard. On Channel 16, the skipper made a request of assistance from other vessels. Boats C and D both heard the request for assistance. C was a little further away. Boat D specifically asked, "How far from the island are you?" Because when they saw that, they knew if they were to do a rescue attempt, they would be placing their boat and the rest of their crew in harm's way as well. It was at this point, the request for assistance, that the Coast Guard started to launch the Ready 1 helicopter. This resource would be 1 hour away. When any vessel calls on Channel 16 and requests assistance from the Coast Guard, once they get your information, they're going to ask you to switch to Channel 22. Now switching to channel 22 clears the hailing frequency 16 and places all the rescue efforts on one single channel. When the snowman switched to channel 22, none of the other boats heard that and none did. So no more contact were made from the other rescue resources. With the rescue helicopter on the way, Snowman is still drifting towards the rock. They're about a half a mile away from the island when the crew looks up, and about 500 meters away, they spot a surf line. The waves are getting bigger as the water gets shallower. The waves are crashing over the bow and they're kedging. They're using the motor. They're dropping anchors. They're trying everything to stabilize the boat to point it into the waves. But none of that was working, and the surf line was getting closer and closer to the sailors. The crew preparing to go into the surf had their life jackets on. Some of them were inflated. Down below was a skipper speaking to the Coast Guard, and he was telling them they're getting ready to abandon ship, and he grabbed his VHF radio and he took it with him. The life raft is located in a dedicated compartment to the stern of the vessel. The painter of the life raft was attached to the vessel. When a wave came and swept the life raft over the boat, it inflated and it was at the end of its painter. Underneath a life raft are water bags that fill to provide stability so the life raft doesn't flip upside down in heavy waves or wind. That precluded two gentlemen from being able to pull that back. They were unable to pull the life raft because of the weight, because of the waves, because of the wind, back to the vessel. While the crew was trying to pull the life raft back, somebody said, "I think this is going to roll us." That's right. One of the waves came crashing over the boat and it rolled it to about 90 degrees. The mast got stuck on the bottom and snapped it off. It also detached the life raft altogether from the boat. The painter was gone. From the cockpit, the skipper and two others were in the water. One was dangling with his tether, and he was able to release that and get free. That left 3 in the water and 3 on the boat. There were 2 still on the deck forward of the bow, and one was dangling with his tether on the side of the vessel, tangled in some of the debris when the mast was over. The 2 who remained on the boat were able to cut the one dragging's tether, and he floated away conscious towards the shore. First 3 off the boat made it to the shore. One actually found the life raft, climbed inside, and rode it through the surf to shore. The 2 others that were delayed, that were on the bow, they made it to shore as well. But most unfortunately, a few moments later, the 3rd came washing up to shore, unconscious and face down. All attempts to survive him failed. With the rescue helicopter on the way, the crew was able to retrieve the life raft, and they used that for shelter because most of them were suffering from hypothermia. Using the flares that they were able to retrieve out of the life raft, they were able to signal the helicopter to identify their precise location on the shore. Once the helicopter identified their location, they were able to lower the rescue swimmer down into a basket to retrieve the rest of the crew. All 6 were retrieved, and they moved them to a hospital immediately. The total time that elapsed from the start of the rudder loss all the way to the boat being on the shore and the rescue was about 2.5 hours. Many of you are going to have the ability to look in the internet and find out where exactly this incident report is online, and I'm going to stay away from that because in doing my research is where I heard the words lawsuits, lawyers, and not guns, but lies. And I think it's going to be important that we talk about 2 things. First thing, why it's going to be important for you to panic early. We want to expand those rescue resources, but most importantly, how to communicate in an emergency. If the skipper would have requested assistance earlier, it would have been 1 hour for them to get to the scene. As we know, that 1 hour was spent trying to jury-rig a rudder. By not requesting other vessels to stick by for assistance, he also took that rescue option off of the table as well. You want to be able to expand your resources in an emergency. First, you have to recognize it's an emergency, and any vessel that doesn't have any control is an emergency. But the other thing you want to do is while you expand those resources, you have to remember that if we lose a helicopter or mechanical, you'll still need the redundancy of boats nearby that could perform the rescue for you. So when the skipper requested other boats for assistance only 1 mile from shore, given the time to sail those boats upwind to help him was probably very unreasonable. Those rescue resources were also off the table. The course of the Snowman after the rudder failure was almost entirely dictated by the wind and swell direction. Since the loss of a rudder, the position was always moving towards the island. Here's an example of what many navigators use to help them in a crisis decision making. It's a map of the aerial assets of the Coast Guard of this race with a 1-hour flight time with overlapping circles. Drifting towards a lee shore, having the materials of understanding the theory on how to control a boat is very different than having mastered the task in and of itself. I would say most offshore experienced sailors understand the theory of using drogues, jury-rigged rudders, using buckets to steer a vessel. But in practice in heavy seas, do you still have that experience? So this team probably had the experience to have it done in theory, but they probably never really practiced it in those conditions on this boat. It's one thing to understand the theory, but it's another thing to have control of the vessel. Even before you sail, it's going to be really important to understand the rescue resources that might be available to you along your journey. It's really important to build redundancy into your emergency action plans just in case one of your rescue options is no longer available. You want to expand your rescue resources. Now, I know television these days makes the Coast Guard look like it's instant rescue on demand, and there's some insurance policies that make it look like the rescue's ready there to evacuate you at a moment's time, but that is just not the case. Your decision-making matrix in a rescue must include the resources, the ranges, and their limitations. In this flowchart, you can see how the U.S. Coast Guard responds to a mayday. If you immediately request assistance, it moves over into the category of requesting assistance. It takes about 15 minutes to get authorization in some instances to get that aircraft wheels up to help you. If you say no, you don't request assistance, there's other information the Coast Guard's going to be collecting. They're going to be monitoring you. They're going to ask you a lot of different questions, being ready in case you have to go to a rescue operation. But let me tell you, in a situation such as this, it's going to be important to panic early. Yes, call for the rescue helicopter if you can't control your boat. If you fix it and gain controllability, then you can always call them off. But the good thing is, they're going to be there on the scene to help monitor you. And now the other thing that you can do to help your team out is get one of these stickers right here. You see this sticker? This is free from the Auxiliary Coast Guard. It's a 9-liner. It tells you exactly what to say if you're in an emergency. And if somebody's panicking in an emergency, like you get a help call like I did one day, help me, the boat is sinking, click, that's all they said. You can also use this sticker right here and you run through the 1 through 9, get control of their voices, ask them the questions, and then you can get the information needed. That way other people who are nearby can give them assistance as needed. This is important. Everybody on your boat should be trained on how to communicate in an emergency. And you go to the Coast Guard Auxiliary and they're going to give it to you for free. And you could meet your rescue helicopter guy there because you don't want to meet a rescue swimmer in the midst of an emergency. The quick decision to sail out and get a tow to get away from the island caused a singular focused decision making that stayed on the rails. It's a phenomenon called the fog of war. If the ocean isn't trying to help you, it's definitely trying to kill you, and the fog of war phenomena really fits into sailing as well. Every soldier, every sailor, every airman hears about this while they're doing their tours of duty. But in this case, we think there is a strong possibility because this happened at night, the team was able to lose their spatial awareness. All they saw was darkness. Having quick reference points to how close an island might be was probably not within their visual capabilities at the time. They also lost temporal awareness. That's right. In an emergency, what feels like 15 minutes could be 30 to 45 minutes. We lose track of time. We narrowly focus on a task and a mission. We're spending a lot of time talking to people. We're giving information. There's a lot of tasks going on. We're trying to create solutions. But what happens is you're only focusing on the problem and we're not playing the future battle. What's happening in the next 5 minutes? How much time do we have before we have to change or give up to the next option? What is the plan B? We get caught up in the fog of war. And how do you break that? You break that through trained emergency action plans. Understanding that on a heavy weather day, we might want to try to drop a drogue and go sailing with the drogue and see if we can steer it. We find out what action plans that we have designed that work. We develop procedures. We develop plans and we practice. So in an emergency, it's things that we have already mastered that we know how to do. We're not relying on things we think we know the theory on. It's the thing that this team can pull together in an emergency and practice them. It's through the emergency action plans. That's what stops the fog of war. If you do it time and time and time again, you're going to be able to handle every emergency when you practice it. This is Schaefer from the Three Sheets Regatta, St. Croix, St. John, St. Thomas. Thanks for watching this episode of the Sailors Debrief.